And he goes, you know what? You're right. Okay. I think it's possible for someone to run across Kyrgyzstan, but not you. And I'll never forget the way that he did that. And it was just purely based on the way that I looked. You know, he didn't know anything about me. He didn't know my skills. He didn't know how many hours I put into mountains in my life to this point. He didn't know my grit. He just knew what I looked like, which is a woman. Hey, how's it going?
Jenny, good to have you on the show. And thank you for coming on all the way from Canada. You're in quarantine at the moment?
I am in quarantine. Just got back from Scotland.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, I have to say, I was really impressed with some of the stuff you've done over the last couple of years. How did this sort of love for adventure and running come about?
So I grew up in the Canadian Rockies, and, you know, I always was into travel. That was always my big passion. And I was also into running, and that was just kind of these two completely different passions that I had. And then when I left home after I finished school and started traveling the world, I was kind of immune to homesickness, and I still am, but I miss mountains. It's just one thing that whenever I'm in mountains, wherever they are in the world, even if they're a country that I didn't even know previously existed, I just feel at home. I feel that comfortable, peaceful thing that I think most people feel when they're in their actual home. So it just kind of all came out of this love of mountains. And I realized like I could combine my love of endurance sport and travel, and putting those two things together was just like the thing that made my heart sing. And so that's what I've pursued over the last 15 years of adventure.
Oh, wow. God. So you've been doing this 15 years?
I guess so. Yeah, when I finished university, I went back home briefly, and I lasted like a month and spent everything that I had, which wasn't a lot, on a touring bicycle and cycled up to the Yukon. And that was my first really big adventure. At the time, I'd never cycled, like I've never rode a bike aside from like a little kid bike or whatever. So I didn't know how to ride a bike. That's not a problem. You can learn pretty quickly. They say it's like riding a bike. But I didn't know how to, I didn't know there were tubes inside the tires. Like that was how, my bike knowledge was just really, really pathetic. So it was a bit of I don't think it was a smart place to start adventure, to go into the Canadian wilderness with something you don't know how to fix. But
was that a road bike or a mountain bike?
It was a touring bike. So it is quite similar geometry to a road bike. And it's a steel frame, Canadian made. I loved it. I still actually have that bike.
Yeah, it's actually funny enough, exactly the same. How I started in adventure was to buy a touring bike and then cycle across America.
Wow, that's a big start.
And as you say, I'd never sort of gone more than sort of 10 miles in one day, and then did very little training, and then was like, right, okay, I'm 70 miles, New York to Princeton.
Oh my gosh. I also think it's the best way to start. Like, it's stupid and you're going to hurt yourself quite a lot. But yeah. I was 21 at the time, so you can take the pain, just go for it.
Yeah, and then changing a tire, I hadn't changed one for probably 15 years from when I was sort of taught, and I was like, right, okay, how do I do this again?
Yeah,
and I was there.
I had a handwritten note in my bag for how to do it.
And I was there for like an hour, just sort of trying to break it and trying to do this. Whereas, as you say, now probably takes you a minute or two.
Depends on the tire. Road tires can take me a little while. But yeah, hopefully a minute or two.
Yeah. And so the mountain race around the world, how did that idea sort of start about, and what sort of drove you to do it?
It was never meant to happen. I came across, I just was looking for an adventure in mountains. I was really craving mountains. I love Scotland, and I really love living there, but I was really missing the big mountains. And I spend a lot of time daydreaming at maps. That's just one of my guilty pleasures throughout the day. When I should be working, I look at maps. And I came across the Tian Shan of Kyrgyzstan and was looking at images of them. And you ever have that moment where your heart stops and you know that your life isn't complete until you go to that actual place? And that was my reaction to the Tian Shan. So I decided I would go there. And And somehow in that process, I really can't remember how, because I'm sure there was wine involved, I decided, cycling across them would just be too fast. I would miss it. So I should slow down and maybe just run across. And I would run unsupported because I've always believed in unsupported challenges. I think you're more immersed in the culture and the community when you do it that way. And no one had ever done that. No one had ever crossed Kyrgyzstan on foot in recorded history. I mean, I'm sure lots of people have, but I mean, running in this way had never been done, which was so exciting to me because it seems like there are no world first left. And I couldn't believe there was this entire country that just seemed like no one had done it. I should have taken way more time to contemplate why no one did it. But I just, obviously was so stoked and went ahead planning this and figuring out how to do it. And then I went out and did it. And it was by far the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. So the recovery afterwards was brutal. Like I had no idea how to recover from something that intense. So it was months and months after I'd done that world first. That was meant to be the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. And then, who knows what was next. I started looking back on it and started realizing that was actually the most alive I've ever been. It was the best thing I ever did. The whole process of it, from planning, having to figure out a route, to actually doing it and living out there, was by far the best thing I'd ever did. And I wanted to do it again. And so again, wine was involved. I mean, we've got to blame wine for almost all the ideas that I come up with. I decided I would do this. I actually made a list of all the mountain ranges I wanted to run across. And then there's actually more mountain ranges in the world than you realize. So I had this huge list. So I thought I need a theme. So I'll just pick one on every continent and then it's a thing. And then there's only 6 and it's not that bad. And so that's how the challenge was born. And a few months later, I went to Africa to do the Atlas Mountains.
Oh, wow. And so the run before, were you a big runner or did you train hard for it, or was it very much a get up and go?
Yeah, running's been a really significant part of my life since I was a teenager. It started from a really negative place. When I was 15 or 16, I started running just because I absolutely hated my body. I think a lot of teenage girls go through that, where what you see in media and magazines, I mean, now I know that that's all photoshopped, but at the time you look at that and you go, well, my body doesn't look anything like that. And I'm being told I'm meant to look like that. So I would run just to punish myself. And I hated it. It came from a really negative place. But the more I ran, the better it got. And the other benefits, the mental health benefits, the not looking at my body like it was an object that had to look like these magazines, but rather looking at my body as something that could take me further away on adventures and up trails, because I was so outdoorsy and I just loved being in the mountains. Then running started to develop to be something that was just really important to me and something that I actually loved and I did on purpose. So running was always a really big part of my life. So when I went to go run across the Tian Shan, I was pretty competent. I'd been doing it for a long time. And, I was pretty fit at the time. I didn't specifically train so much because it's impossible to have a real life and train for something on that level where you're going to be running for 10 hours a day with a backpack. You can't hold down a real life and do that.
Yeah, I think in my run, I trained in London at the time where I was working. And I was training on tarmac roads and pavements. And once I got out to the sort of Mount Elgon in Kenya, it was dirt roads, which were bumpy and uneven. And suddenly this sort of really easy run, which I'd been training on, going down very lovely paved roads, suddenly became completely different from what I'd been training. And you can't really train for that other than try and build up your cardiovascular fitness.
Yeah, definitely not. If you live in London, I think that's really difficult in cities to have access to mimic something like that. I mean, don't you guys have One Hill or something like that?
Yeah, which I think I walked up over the weekend in about 2 minutes.
Oh no.
I wouldn't quite class it as a big hill.
Yeah, there's no altitude zone.
No, unfortunately not. What was I going to say? So in terms of Kyrgyzstan, where did you fly into?
Bishkek. So I flew into Bishkek, the capital. Yep. And that's not a very high altitude. I think is it 1,200? Yeah. You've been there. But I mean, still coming from the UK to 1,200, and if you're about to do something really ridiculously hard, that's going to take you up to 4,500. You need to take it pretty slow. So I spent a couple of days in Bishkek. And the only thing I had to do, because on this adventure, I didn't do this since, but on this adventure, I did take most of my kit with me. So the only thing I had to buy was the gas canisters that you can't fly with.
Yeah.
So Bishkek has a mountaineering office because they do have some 7,000ers. So that's basically, I mean, when I was in Kyrgyzstan, that was the majority of the adventure tourism industry, was just the mountaineers that would come to plant flags on summits. So I went to the mountaineering office to buy my gas canisters, and the guy there was like, "What's your holiday plan? What are you doing in Kyrgyzstan?" And so I told him, like, I'm just going to run across the country. It's going to be 1,000 kilometers. It's going to be great. Got a backpack. And this guy, I mean, till my dying day, I'm going to remember this conversation. He just looked me up and down. He went, no, this can't be done. So I just said, well, no, you're wrong. I mean, unfortunately for him, the only thing I had to do that day was adjust to altitude. So like I had time. So I was like, no, it can't be done, buddy. Let me show you. And he had a map on the wall, and I kind of like drew on the map for him my route that I had designed, that I'd spent so much time designing because there was no route. And he followed along, and he went, you know what, actually, that is a good route. I'm like, yes. And he goes, you know what, you're right. Okay, I think it's possible for someone to run across Kyrgyzstan, but not you. And I'll never forget the way that he did that. And it was just purely based on the way that I looked. You know, he didn't know anything about me. He didn't know my skills. He didn't know how many hours I put into mountains in my life to this point. He didn't know my grit. He just knew what I looked like, which is a woman. And yeah, I was so determined. I mean, he fueled so much of that run, just that one conversation of this guy just doubting me just because of the way that I looked. So that was my start in Kyrgyzstan. I'm in Bishkek and chatting to him.
It's good motivation when times are tough. You're like, I'm going to show him.
Yeah, he can't win.
No matter what happens, I am going to make it.
Yeah.
Good. And so from Bishkek, you went probably over to Karakul?
That's correct. See, you know your country.
And did you start around Karakul?
Yeah, so I had a taxi drop me off a fair bit east of Karakul. Like, I didn't want to get too close to the borders just because I didn't have border permits, and I'd read a lot about corrupt guards, and I was really like nervous about that kind of stuff at the time. So yeah, I had a taxi driver just take me down the road, like really far east of Karakul, and then when I told him to let me off because I knew I could get up a river valley, he was just like, "What? You want to get out of the taxi? Like, did I say something wrong? Like, you can't be here. Like, there's nothing here. It's just the wilderness." I'm like, yeah, here. And gave him the money and left. And he was just like, oh my God.
Good. And was that by any chance the world's worst road in Asia?
It felt that way at the time. I didn't know if it made a list. Is it on a list?
There's a road which goes up to Alakul. And it's about 10, I think it's about 10 or 20 kilometers, and it's just horrendous.
I did run that road, and I assumed it was disused until I saw Bahunka come around the corner, literally on like some 45-degree tilt, and I was like, I mean, the drivers here are ballsy. Like, I wouldn't take my all-wheel drive on this under any circumstances.
We when we drove up in our car, and we got stuck at the top because it was pouring with rain, and
God.
I mean, it was a horrendous road.
Yeah, there's some. So I went back to Kyrgyzstan a few years later to do a mountain biking race, and yeah, I can certainly attest that the roads there are just something else. Like, they just haven't been touched since the Soviets left, it seems like.
Yeah,
I think now there's a lot of infrastructure in the cities, but yeah, in the wilderness there were a lot of things that I just thought were trails until a Lada comes around the corner, and you just can't believe anyone's driving there.
And one thing is, because you are sort of traveling over the mountain ranges, food and water, how did you manage to gather that? Because I imagine you are covering between 30 and 60 kilometers each day.
Yeah, that's what I would try to average. And so you're quite committed. I mean, the stretches, I can kind of figure out that to be on a fast packing setup, something that's light enough for me to carry. For me personally, 5 days is kind of the maximum that I can pack food for and still be able to move and do up my backpack. At that point, you're really committed. Like, nothing can go wrong, because if you're out there for an extra day, that's a hungry day. So I do dehydrated food and a stove. I find that's lighter. And also if you're going into mountains, I just think it's way safer to take a stove. You know, you have to be able to warm yourself up or clean water or something like that. So, so I would take dehydrated food, and, you know, it's not now knowing what I know, because I've been doing this for a few years, it's certainly not a healthy thing to do to your body to be in starvation mode for that long. Like you can't, or I can't get enough calories in a day. It can't be done. Like running 10 hours, and eating that much is just something that I've never been able to manage. So it's definitely one of the hardest things to manage in the run, but you know, it's one of the most basic things. It's just food.
Yeah. No, of course. And in terms of the people you met along the way, especially up in the mountain ranges, are probably pretty nomadic people who live up there in yurts. Did they invite you in? Did they?
Yeah. I mean, aside from the mountains themselves, that was what called my heart. It was the nomads. I really wanted to meet them. You know, I've always believed that I have the heart of a nomad, and I was so curious about this culture. And they were unanimously lovely. I couldn't believe that, you know, I'd feel so alone. I'd be out in the wilderness, just completely by myself. Wouldn't have used my voice in more than a day, and not seen anyone. But if I stopped for any reason, like to faff with my bag or put on some sunscreen or whatever, these nomads would just come out of the woodwork, and I wouldn't realize that they all knew where I was, and they had their eyes on me the whole time. It would seem that suddenly someone would show up on horseback and say, like, "Why did you stop? We saw you were running for hours. Are you okay? Do you need something? Come to the yurt. We'll get you some tea." And yeah, I was invited into so many homes, and it was such a humbling experience to have so many people who have objectively so little, but are just so willing to share and make sure that I'm okay, that I'm warm enough, that I'm fed, and really some of the loveliest people I think on this planet.
Yeah, I agree. Kyrgyzstan was definitely one of my favorites when I went across Central Asia.
Nice.
And so you went from Karakul, and where did you finish up?
In Osh.
Oh, in Osh, God. That is a very, very long way. That's what? Was it 1,000?
It was about 1,000 kilometers, yeah.
And how long did that take you? How many days?
25 days, I think.
That's
with a few days out with food poisoning.
Wow.
So I think there were 22 days of running.
What was
21 or something like that?
What was the produce that got you?
I don't know. I'll never know. I mean, it could have also been water. I mean, a lot of the water, like I always do filter my water, but some of the water is quite heavily contaminated out there. So, gosh, I mean, it could have been anything. I mean, that was really towards the end. Like I was really close to Osh when it happened. And so I think at that point, like your body's strength to defend itself is just so low. You know, you just put yourself through so much. You're so exhausted in such a deep way that, you know, your defenses are just gone. So, who knows?
God.
It wasn't nice.
And how did it feel finishing in Osh?
I just never, I mean, there were so many points that I thought I would never make it. You know, and no one thought I couldn't do it. I mean, that guy that I met in Bishkek who said, "Not by you," he wasn't a singular case. Like a lot of people believe that. And even people at home, like I remember leaving and people saying things to me like, "You know what, no matter what happens, it'll still be a story." And me going like, what does that mean? So, you know, there was a lot of belief that I couldn't do it, both myself and externally. So when I did do it, I mean, there was just so much, you know, looking back on that 16-year-old girl who started running because she hated her body to suddenly being someone that is the only person alive who's ever run across the country. Like, that's cool. And it was really overwhelming. I remember running through the gates and just like starting to cry. But the thing was, you know, with everyone believing that I couldn't do it and the Kyrgyz people being lovely about the fact that I couldn't do it, in those last few kilometers coming into Osh, cars kept on stopping to try and give me a lift because I said I was going to Osh, which was 5 kilometers away now. And they'd be like, "Oh, it's too far. You'll never be able to run there. Get in the car." And I'm like, just come 1,000 kilometers. So I was kind of having this moment running into the city. And, you know, when you do things like this, there's no finish line. It's not like finishing a marathon where someone gives you chocolate milk and a free t-shirt and stuff. Like you're alone on the city street.
Your little
emotional moment. Yeah, exactly. So that kind of happened. But then at the same time, there were just all these cars, and I wasn't used to cities, and I was sort of like in a city with pavement, and all these people like trying to give me a lift and taxis honking at me, and I was just like having a big moment here, guys. So it was kind of, it was a funny moment, but it was big. Like I was really, really proud of myself for probably the first time on that level.
And what was the sort of highlight, do you feel, of that trip? Was there a sort of moment that stuck out where you were like, wow, that was incredible?
I mean, there were so many, and there were probably some every day, and then there was probably also lowlights every day. Probably about halfway through, just before halfway through, I'd had a real incident where I'd made a huge navigational mistake, and that had led to me being kind of caught in some landslides and a really challenging climb that I absolutely shouldn't have been doing by myself unroped, and it was really scary. And I knew that I was way beyond the line of acceptable risk. That one slip would cost me my life. So it was like this prolonged near-death experience. And so then when I finished that, and I did throughout that say, well, I've crossed the line. I've crossed the line that I accept, which means I can't do this. And everyone was right. I can't do this. I'm going home. So I'd said the words out loud that I was quitting. As soon as I survived this, I was just going to, I think I was 3 days away from the next highway, but like in those 3 days, I would get to the highway and I would just go home. Like I would just can it. So I had quit, but obviously had to keep moving because I'm in the middle of the wilderness with only a couple of days worth of food. And then after that happened, I got invited into a yurt by some nomads, and like I was really upset. I was in a really fragile place because I nearly died. And this family took me in, and I was just kind of part of their family for a night. Even if you don't speak the same language, it's amazing how much you can connect with people. And they just totally revived. Like they didn't know that I'd had a horrible day. They didn't know that I'd been like crying all afternoon. They just saw that I was outside and took me in. And it just totally revived me. And the next day was this really beautiful day. And I remember having a really nice sunset and a really nice camp spot, and just like everything fell into place. And like after your worst day, you always have your best day, don't you? And so I just remember being really grounded that day and just realizing like this whole concept of being this world first is just crap. Like it's just not important. Like it absolutely doesn't matter. 1,000 people could run across Kyrgyzstan. We'll come back with 1,000 different stories. And that's what's valuable is this experience that I'm having. So after that, I think everything, all my motivation behind this whole project just completely changed. That it was just about, enjoying this experience and connecting with this place and these people. And so that was definitely my biggest mindset change. And that's carried through. That's now how I approach the mountains. I think we have a real culture of first and fastest in adventure. You have to be the first person to do something the fastest or it's not valuable. And I hate that. Like, I just think it's bullshit. I think, adventure is worthwhile.
All these records around the world, which people are sort of doing, they're becoming harder and harder. And actually, a lot of the time, you're doing these sort of adventures for your own. And it's not really, because we were discussing about cycling and how, the first time we were discussing about going across America, and he was like, I'm never going to be the fastest to go. It will be, there's plenty of people far quicker and there's a lot of people. But I was sort of saying that the first time I ever crossed 100 miles in a day, I was like, yes, get in.
Yeah.
But no one cares.
Yeah, I know that's something that I always say to myself when I'm out there. I'm like, no one cares. Like, this is important to only you. So this has to be valuable to you. And this has to be something that's honest to you. Because, like, you're right. No one cares. This is such a privileged thing that we get to do. Like, it's beyond privilege.
Yeah.
To go struggle on purpose, to intentionally go have a really bad holiday. That's essentially what it is. So yeah, you just got to remind yourself, like, all of that stuff, it's not important. And when you get to those really hard moments out there, that's not the stuff that's going to get you through thinking like, what about the headline or whatever? Like, you've got to have way better reasons.
Was there,
no one cares.
Was there a point where you sort of did sort of 60 or 50 kilometers in a day or 100 kilometers in a day, and you're like, right, get in, this is amazing, I've just clocked over 100, and then for a brief period, and then you're like, yeah, I mean, that's just me.
Yeah, I think I remember having that in the Atlas Mountains, because the mileage could be a lot higher out there because it was just easier terrain, just faster. And I remember having these big mileage days and thinking like, I'm shit hot right now, like this is going well. And then you just kind of look around yourself and you're like, I mean, I'm like, again, I'm talking to a camera. Like I'm alone. Like, it doesn't matter. And if I said that to like the next passerby I see, some Berber coming down the trail, they'll be like, what? Like, what have you just said? And why does anyone care?
And how did your race or your trip in the Atlas Mountains compare with Kyrgyzstan?
So I arrived there feeling really confident because I now knew what it took to run across a mountain range. The Atlas they're a lot shorter, like altitude-wise. There were a lot of things that were just going to be easier. The places I was going weren't frequented by visitors, but at least Morocco does have a huge tourism industry. So at least in the cities that I would use for logistics, there was like people who looked like me, and there was a bit more of a culture towards that. So I went into it thinking this is going to be way easier. And I think the mountains always punish confidence. So they were completely different, but they were really hard in different ways. Part of that was myself. I had a really big fall in the beginning and cut my hip open really quite badly. Definitely did need stitches, but I didn't get them. I just duct taped it closed and kept going. So I had an injury, and that was getting infected, and it was really swollen. So I was limping as it was. But the biggest problem in Morocco was, of course, the cultural difference. That being a solo woman doing mountain sports just doesn't exist. And there were quite a lot of men trying to stop me, and never in a threatening and violent way, just in a paternal way. Like, they just really didn't accept, or they'd never seen women doing solo sports. So for them, they could only see danger. They could only see that I was going to die, and they didn't want me to die. So it was quite complicated to be, really angry at these people that are trying to stop me from doing my expedition and doing something that I know and something that I'm confident about. But knowing that they're not doing it from a bad place, they're doing it from a place of they want me to be okay, and they just do not believe that I could go into the mountains and be okay. So there was a huge culture clash that kind of overrode the whole, like I've always said with these things, running is by far the easy part. It's the part that everyone thinks is so incredible. Wow, you ran so far. But like, I've always run. Running's awesome. I'm good at it. Right, left. Stop when you're tired. Like, it's easy. So running was just the holiday between like all these logistics, all these cultural issues to figure out, like all the other stuff. That's what's hard.
And the sort of day-to-day running, because it's sort of the day-to-day running is quite mundane. What sort of kept you occupied throughout the day? Because although the scenery is insane in some of these countries, as you say, when you're running morning till evening, your sort of mind wanders. What sort of kept you entertained in your own mind? Did you listen to music, podcasts, or did you?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there are so many hours that I can't account for on these. I have no idea where I was. Like, you get to the end of the day and you want to write in your diary what happened today, and you go, gosh, I have no idea. Like, I literally don't know. And that's partly why I bring a camera, because like I won't remember, because I just have gone to like the zone, and now I've just like my brain's wherever it is. So there's a lot of that. I do listen to music and podcasts. I think music's really fascinating to manipulate your mood. If you need mojo, there's a playlist for that. If you need to calm down because you're scared, there's a playlist for that. Like, when you're alone, you have to find a way to manage your mindsets, because you don't have a partner who's going to say, this isn't working, you need to come back to this. So you have to be able to do that, and you won't always have the capability to do that. When you're feeling really negative, it's so hard to like solo pull yourself out of that negative black hole that you're going down.
Yeah.
So you have to have the discipline and say, I need help. Well, the only help available is my headphones. So music's really fascinating in that way to me, to manipulate my mood. Podcasts I probably got into, I was maybe 3/4 of the way through Kyrgyzstan when I realized, like, I haven't had a conversation in English, the only language I'm confident in a really long time. And I think I forget how to do it. And I think I'm losing my mind. And I found that listening to podcasts, just two people having a conversation, was enough to bring me back to reality and like remember what my life is normally like and the conversations I normally have. Yeah. So podcasts are great for that. Just like injecting something, because as you say, the running is mundane. All you think about all day long is your navigation and finding enough water That's
And
kind of
food.
yeah, and that's all you have to do. That's literally all you have to do is you have to keep moving in the same direction. Like your to-do list is very small. So yeah.
Oh wow. And so you've done the Atlas, you've done what's the one in Kyrgyzstan? I don't know what
The Tian Shan.
that's the one.
Yeah.
And so how many more have you got to go?
One.
Just one.
Yeah, I finished number 5 just over a month ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, just Europe left actually.
Just Europe. And which European range are you?
So it was meant to be the Caucasus, and I was meant to do them this spring, which obviously spring 2020 didn't happen, did it? So it was always meant to be the Caucasus. I'm kind of now at a place where it's more important to me to finish this challenge. I mean, this challenge has been in my life for 4 years. Oh my God, I'm getting old. 4 years. So it's time for me to finish it. So yeah, it was always going to be the Caucasus. Whether or not I'm going to be able to go to Georgia and Azerbaijan by next summer, don't know. But there are other options within Europe. So at this point, I'm not going to make that call until probably May. I'll call it literally last minute because a lot of things stay the same. Like what I need to pack, like I've already prepared the Caucasus expedition. So if it goes ahead, I've already got my route and stuff like that. So I'll wing it.
What is
Something
your
will
route?
happen. Yeah, and there's an autonomous region that's on the coast, on the west.
Okay.
I think it's called Abkhazia or something like that. That's how it looks in English.
Okay.
And the route that I've made, I'm not going to cross into Russia just because of the logistics of going back and forth over borders and all the autonomous regions.
Yeah.
I mean, that's your biggest problem with the Caucasus is all the autonomous regions are like these little red dots on the map going, if you go here, your insurance is void and your country won't come get you if you get in jail for getting your passport wrong.
I remember in Georgia, there was a area in the mountains where, again, we couldn't go. And we sort of walked up and the army were like, no, this is as far as you're allowed to go.
Yeah, and that's going to contribute a lot of extra miles, like a lot, because I'm not going to be able to go straight across. I'm going to have to go around these barriers. And so it's really interesting, but it's also really challenging. So I've kind of got a meandering route across Georgia, and that Georgia's, I think, the first half, it's almost kind of exactly Georgia and then Azerbaijan.
Yep.
And yeah, then basically out to the coast. So it'll be a nice coast to coast.
And so what's your hope is to do that once COVID sort of settles down and you're allowed to go?
I'd rather finish the challenge. So if COVID doesn't allow, then I could do the generic Alps. I absolutely love the Balkans, or I could do Pyrenees, or, I've got plan ABC kind of ready. So as long as any form of going outside is allowed next June, July, I will be out running a mountain range on the European continent.
Oh.
Just which one is I'll be announcing that probably June, July.
Oh, that'd be amazing. And people can follow. And how do people follow your sort of adventures?
I do share them on social media as I go along. Kind of post data just for safety reasons. I don't think it's good to live stream where you are all by yourself with all your fancy stuff. But yeah, I do share everything along on social media at Jenny Tuff. And
what other sort of adventures have you done other than, because you do this mountain biking races? You do these mountain biking races around the world too.
Yeah, my bike touring just kind of got out of hand and started bike packing, and then that led to signing up for ultra distance racing, which isn't my mindset. I'm not a race person. I'm not competitive. I'm one of those people that people get medals for participation. It's people like me who are just everyone did a great job today. That's how I race. I just don't belong in a race environment. But I started doing them, and what I found was it was amazing that there were people just like me, which is something I probably never found. People who are weird the way that I am, people who want to travel the way that I travel, who experience the outdoors the way that I do it, with that combination of being thrilled by the adventure of seeing this place, but also wanting to push their bodies to its limits and find out what their limits are. So I started racing through that, and did see some success, and saw some failures, and it's been amazing. That's certainly something that I'm really missing right now is that race community.
Yeah, so it's very difficult to sort of try and convince people to come and do these sort of expeditions and trips with you when they have a choice between going to a lovely beach holiday where they can sit and relax,
Be comfortable.
go on a 1,000-mile run across the Atlas Mountains. It's
not everyone thinks that's a holiday.
No, join the weird club, hey. So there's a part of the show where we ask the same 5 questions to every guest.
Okay.
And so I will get them up. So we always ask.
I forget what they are.
So we always ask them, on your trips, what's the one thing you crave or miss from home?
It usually takes a while for me to crave or miss. I mean, coffee machine, it comes up a lot as something that I miss. And then when things start to get really bad, like really bad, then I start to miss the couch and how comfortable it is.
What is your favorite adventure book?
The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd. I think she's such a great writer, but there's a lot in the adventure literature industry that is just kind of one narrative of the ex-military British white male. And there's a lot of terminology about conquering mountains and stuff like that. And Nan Shepherd's approach is, I think, very much the female-led approach of the mountain was here before you and will be here after you, and you're a blip, and just experiencing the beauty of the landscape and not worrying about planting flags at the top. And I just really love the way that she writes. And it's a book it's an older book, and it's all in the Cairngorms, which is a part of the world that is really close to my heart. So that's 100% my favorite.
Oh, very nice. Okay, so did you have an inspirational figure growing up?
I didn't. And I think that has driven a lot of what I've done now, because I was always adventuring. I just wasn't telling anyone about it. And the switch from me, who was a total introvert, to suddenly start, filming myself and putting things on social media, that was, it doesn't come naturally to me, but I found it was really important because I never had anyone who looked like me when I was growing up. And I say growing up, I mean up until like really recently. I never had anyone in the outdoor industry that I could look to and think that person's like me and I'm inspired by them. So that's why I think it's important to bring different voices into the industry and to bring different narratives, different body types, different human types. So yeah, I didn't have one.
I think there was a quote from someone who said he was on a very similar line of thought, and he said when he grew up he didn't really have an inspirational figure, so he just looks to inspire himself. Wow. And looks to make sure that he's the figure that he wants to be.
That's beautiful. I like that.
And I think it was Matthew McConaughey always said his inspirational figure was him 5 years from now. And so he'd always look 5 years ahead and say, oh, who is this figure I'm going to be? And then he would try and emulate that figure. And then 5 years from now, it'd always be him from 5 years.
I'm going to trial that, actually. That sounds really intriguing. I like it.
Do you have a favorite quote or motivational quote that sort of keeps you going or inspires you?
So I have a lot of mantras. I'm really big on mantras.
Yeah.
One of mine is don't be shit. One of mine is toughen up. But one of the quotes that I really love that I keep coming back to, and something that I always kind of need at the start, is always do what you are afraid to do. It's a Waldo Emerson quote, I think. And I think that always gives me that courage, because at the start line, you always just look at it and go, like, suddenly the mountains get way bigger, don't they? And you just go, oh, what have I done? I shouldn't be here. I can't do this. And then I remind myself, like, that fear is a good sign. You need that.
Yeah. Oh, that's quite nice. And I imagine a lot of people listening are always keen to go on these sort of grand adventures. What would you recommend for them to get them started?
I would say I'm a really big fan of make a list. There are reasons why you're not out there right now. So make a list of what they are. You know, it could be money, time, skills, whatever it is. Make a list of all the reasons things that stand in your way between you and your adventure. And then just start ticking the things off the list. If you don't have the skills, well, go get the skills, so I think if you just break it down on that level and just show yourself, these are the barriers and this is how, and then make a plan for how you're going to access all of them. And the second thing I would say is you're tougher than you think. You can totally do this. If fear is one of the problems, let me just tell you that you don't need that. You're fine. You got this.
Amazing. And I know we said this earlier, but just for anyone who wasn't listening, how can people find you and follow your adventures for the future?
On social media, it's Jenny Tough, real name. And same with the website, it's Jenny Tough.
How many times have people sort of said, is that your real name?
All the time. And I get really self-conscious that people think it's my Instagram name, but I'm not cool enough to have an Instagram name. And if I did, I'm not sure that's the one I would give myself. But yeah, no, I got lucky with that one. Real name.
And finally, I suppose what people are wondering, what is next?
What is next is I will finish this challenge to run across a mountain range in every continent. So there's just one chapter left, and that's my biggest focus right now.
Oh, amazing. And just on a sort of more personal, did you ever try horse's milk in Kyrgyzstan?
Kumis, yes. I didn't get a choice on it. The nomads were very clear that it was very important to my health that I drink a lot of kumis.
Yeah.
I think one of the yurts didn't let me leave without a liter of it. Like he literally dumped out my water bottle and filled it up with kumis. He was like, "It's really good for you." Yeah. Did you have it?
I tried the horse milk's cheese, and that was
oh wow,
that was more than I could bear.
That's a more advanced level. The kumis is not as. I mean, it's still an acquired taste, but I think you went too advanced by starting with the cheese. You should have started with the milk.
Yeah, after trying the cheese, which was, back of the throat, like, this is just awful. I was like, no, I can give horse's milk a miss. As much as they claim to be high in vitamin C, I was like, it's not happening.
Yeah, I understand your trepidation with that.
Yeah. Well, Jenny, thank you so much for coming on today. And
thanks for having me.
I look forward to following your adventure in the European mountain range, whichever one they may be, and when that happens.
Yeah.
And again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, the Sherpa at the bottom of the first step got incredibly altitude sick. He had summited twice before, but very altitude sick, and was throwing photos of his family off the mountain, saying he was going to die, and it required. He didn't want the oxygen we gave him. He refused it because he wanted to, die in peace.